Jake Morrison stood at the back of the training hall, watching his classmates practice combat moves that would probably kill him if he tried them. The massive Krillian warrior Thakmor lifted weights that weighed more than 3 humans combined. His green skin rippled with muscles as thick as tree trunks. When he roared during his exercises, the sound made Jake's chest vibrate. Across the room, Veltara moved like lightning-made flesh. The Zephyrian female's silver skin gleamed as she darted between training dummies faster than Jake could track. Her blade work looked like deadly art. She could strike 12 targets in the time it took Jake to swing once. The worst part was watching Zenthea, the Mentari prodigy. She didn't even move from her meditation mat. Her large black eyes stayed closed while training drones attacked her from all sides. She simply thought at them, and they fell from the air like broken toys. Her pale blue skin never showed a drop of sweat. Jake looked down at his own hands. Human hands, weak, slow, and completely ordinary. He had scraped through the academy entrance exam by pure luck. While other species sent their best warriors, fastest scouts, and smartest minds, Earth had sent him. A skinny kid from Ohio who got winded climbing stairs. "Morrison!" Commander Rixtal's voice cut through the training noise like a laser blast. The hegemony officer stood 8 feet tall with skin like polished stone. His forearms moved with perfect coordination as he pointed at Jake. "You're up for combat assessment." Jake's stomach dropped. Around him, conversation stopped. Even Thakmor paused his lifting to watch. Combat assessment meant fighting a training drone programmed to match cadet skill levels. For most students, it was routine practice. For Jake, it was public humiliation. He walked to the combat circle on shaking legs. The training drone hummed to life, scanning him with red sensors. It was supposed to adjust its difficulty based on the cadet's abilities. Jake wondered if it would just shut down from embarrassment. "Begin!" Commander Rixtal barked. The drone moved toward Jake with casual speed. Not the lightning attacks it used on Veltara, or the crushing force it showed Thakmor. It treated Jake like a child learning to walk. Even so, Jake barely managed to dodge its first swing. He grabbed his training sword with both hands and swung wildly. The drone stepped aside without effort. Jake stumbled forward off balance. The drone could have ended the match right there, but it waited patiently for Jake to recover. The watching cadets started to whisper. Jake heard fragments of their conversations. How did he even get accepted? Humans don't belong here. This is painful to watch. Jake swung again, putting all his strength behind the blow. The drone blocked with one finger. The impact sent vibrations up Jake's arms that made his teeth ache. He tried a thrust. The drone moved its head slightly, and Jake's blade passed harmlessly, through empty air. For 3 long minutes, Jake stumbled around the circle while the drone played with him. When Commander Rixtal finally called time, Jake was gasping for breath and covered in sweat. The drone looked like it had been taking a pleasant stroll. "Pathetic," Commander Rixtal announced to the hall. "This is what happens when inferior species try to compete above their level. Morrison, report to remedial training." Again. Jake gathered his gear while trying to ignore the stares. His human classmates Alex Carter and Maria Santos looked sympathetic, but they kept their distance. Being seen with the class failure wouldn't help their own standings. Only Lisa Park approached him as he headed for the exit. She was human too, but unlike Jake, she actually belonged at the academy. She scored in the middle of their class rankings and showed promise as a communications officer. "Don't let them get to you," she said quietly. "You'll find your place." Jake wanted to believe her, but the evidence said otherwise. In tactical simulations, he scored lowest in the class. His strategies were too simple for the advanced scenarios. In physical training, he couldn't keep up with alien physiology designed for war. Even in academics, his human brain processed information slower than enhanced alien minds. That evening, Jake sat in his shared quarters reading the latest class rankings on his tablet. His name sat at the bottom of the list like always. 200 cadets from across the galaxy, and Jake Morrison ranked dead last in every category that mattered. Thakmor entered their room carrying a protein shake that smelled like motor oil. The Krillian warrior was decent enough as roommates went. He didn't mock Jake openly like some others did. He just treated him like furniture that occasionally moved around. "You should consider transfer," Thakmore said in his rumbling voice. "Civilian programs need people too. No shame in finding proper place." Jake stared out their small window at the stars beyond Nexus Prime. Thousands of alien civilizations out there, and somehow humanity had convinced itself it deserved to sit at the big table with the galactic powers. Maybe they were wrong. Maybe humans were meant to be the junior partners, grateful for whatever scraps the real powers decided to share. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. Their military doctrine was tested by countless wars against every imaginable enemy. Species like the Krillians had evolved specifically for combat. The Zephyrians were born for speed and precision. The Mentari wielded mental powers that seemed like magic. What did humans have? Jake looked at his reflection in the window. Average height, average build, average everything. Humans weren't the strongest or fastest or smartest. They weren't even the most numerous species in the galaxy. They were just ordinary. Tomorrow would bring more failures, more public embarrassment, more proof that Jake Morrison didn't belong among the future leaders of galactic civilization. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine himself back on Earth, working some quiet job where nobody expected greatness from him. But sleep wouldn't come easily. Outside, alien stars shined with cold light, and somewhere in the darkness, Jake's destiny was waiting for him to discover it. The emergency alarm screamed through Nexus Prime at Oro 400 hours, jolting every cadet from sleep. Jake tumbled from his bunk as red warning lights bathed their quarters in blood-colored shadows. Thakmore was already moving, his warrior instincts kicking in before his mind fully woke. "All cadets report to Command Center immediately," came the announcement over the station speakers. "This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." Jake grabbed his uniform and ran through corridors filled with confused cadets. The Academy had never called a real emergency before. Training exercises, yes, but those came with advance warning and careful preparation. This felt different, dangerous. The command center buzzed with activity when Jake arrived. Holographic displays showed star maps covered in red warning symbols. Senior officers moved between stations with grim faces. Commander Rixtal stood at the center of it all, his forearms working different control panels at once. "Unknown fleet, detected at Outer Rim colonies," he announced to the gathered cadets. "First contact with hostile alien force, colony worlds going dark one by one." The main display showed grainy footage from the colony ship New Haven. Jake watched in horror as massive dark vessels appeared from empty space, their hulls absorbing light like holes in reality. Energy beams lanced out from the alien ships, and New Haven's shields failed in seconds. The transmission cut to static. "Devourers," whispered Zenthia, her Mentari telepathic abilities picking up scattered thoughts from the fleeing colonists. "They call themselves Devourers. They want to harvest all life in this sector." A cold silence filled the command center. The hegemony had faced many enemies over 10,000 years, but nothing like this. These ships used technology that made their best defenses useless. Worse, they moved with purpose and intelligence, not like raiders or pirates, but like an organized military force with a clear mission. "Academy is now emergency command post," Commander Rixtal declared. "Top cadets will assist fleet commanders with tactical analysis. Lower-ranked students handle support duties." Jake knew where that put him. While cadets like Gaxthor the Krillian and Zephyra the Mentari were assigned to work directly with admirals, Jake found himself in the communications basement, monitoring deep space frequencies. It was busy work, the kind of job they gave to cadets who couldn't be trusted with anything important. The communication center was a maze of electronic equipment that hummed and beeped constantly. Jake sat at a monitoring station surrounded by dozens of screens showing signal patterns and frequency analyses. Most of it was automated, but someone had to watch for anything unusual the computers might miss. For hours, Jake listened to the sounds of a galaxy under attack. Emergency broadcasts from colony worlds, panicked messages from cargo ships fleeing, the outer systems. Military communications filled with confusion and fear as hegemony forces tried to understand an enemy, unlike anything they had faced before. The Devourers moved with terrible efficiency. They appeared at populated worlds, deployed harvesting machines, and collected all organic life within hours. Then they moved to the next target, leaving behind empty planets stripped of everything that had once lived and breathed. Jake's head ached from the constant noise of 100 different alien languages reporting the same story of destruction. He was reaching for pain medication when a weak signal caught his attention. It was barely above background static, coming from the direction of the lost colonies. He isolated the frequency and boosted the signal strength. Slowly, words became clear through the interference. Human words, speaking English with a Midwest accent that reminded Jake of home. "This is Harmony Colony Ship, emergency broadcast on all frequencies. We are alive but trapped underground in the mining complex. Devourer machines are searching the surface. We estimate 18 hours before they breach our shelter. Please, if anyone can hear this, we have 300 civilians, including 47 children. Our coordinates are..." The message repeated, 3 times before cutting to static. Jake stared at his screen in shock. Harmony was one of the first colonies to go dark 3 days ago. Everyone assumed there were no survivors. He ran the message through analysis programs to verify its authenticity. The voice patterns matched Harmony's colony administrator, Pete Sullivan. The coordinates were correct for their mining operation. But that location was deep in Devourer-controlled space, surrounded by enemy patrols. Jake grabbed the recording and ran upstairs to the main command center. Officers barely looked up as he approached Commander Rixtal's station. The hegemony, Commander was coordinating fleet movements across 6 different star systems. "Sir, I intercepted a distress call from Harmony Colony. They have survivors trapped underground." Commander Rixtal glanced at Jake's datapad without stopping his other work. "Harmony was destroyed 3 days ago. No survivors possible." "But sir, I have verified audio from their colony administrator. 300 people are still alive, but only for 18 more hours." This time, Commander Rixtal stopped and looked directly at Jake. His stone-like face showed no emotion, but his voice carried the weight of command decisions that cost lives. "The coordinates you show are 40 light hours inside enemy territory. Any rescue ship would face at least 50 Devourer vessels. It would be suicide." Gaxthor approached from the tactical station where he had been working with senior officers. The massive Krillion's battle scars seemed darker under the emergency lighting. "I analyzed rescue scenarios," Gaxthor rumbled. "No force can penetrate Devourer defenses at that location. Even full battle fleet would be destroyed before reaching the planet." Zephyra materialized beside them with her typical Zephyrian speed. "My calculations confirm this assessment. The Devourers have established overlapping patrol patterns. Detection is certain. Survival probability is 0. Jake felt the weight of their expertise crushing his desperate hope. These were the Academy's top cadets, beings whose species had been bred for war and tactics. If they said rescue was impossible, who was he to argue? But as he walked back toward the communications center, Jake couldn't stop thinking about the voice in that transmission. Pete Sullivan sounded like Jake's own father back in Ohio, a regular person doing his best in an impossible situation, trying to keep his people alive against odds that would break anyone's spirit. 300 people. 47 children. 18 hours. The galaxy's best military minds had declared them already dead. The hegemony's 10,000 years of tactical experience said rescue was impossible. Every logical analysis pointed to the same conclusion. Jake Morrison, ranked last in his class, didn't know much about military strategy or alien psychology or advanced combat tactics, but he did know something about being underestimated. He knew what it felt like when everyone assumed you were too weak to matter. And sometimes, Jake thought, as he stared at the star charts showing Devourer patrol routes, being underestimated was the only advantage you needed. Jake stood in the Academy's shuttle bay at Oro 200 hours, staring at the oldest training ship in the fleet. The Underdog looked like it had been built from spare parts and held together with hope. Its hull showed scorch marks from 1,000 training. exercises, and one of its engine pods made a concerning rattling sound even when powered down. The shuttle bay was empty except for maintenance drones working on newer vessels. Jake had waited until the night shift when security was lightest. He had studied patrol schedules and duty rosters for 3 hours, looking for this exact window of opportunity. 17 hours remained until the Devourer machines would breach Harmony Colony's underground shelter, 17 hours before 300 innocent people died, because the galaxy's best military minds had declared them impossible to save. Jake climbed aboard the Underdog and began his pre-flight checks. He knew this shuttle better than any cadet in his class. While others trained on modern ships with automated systems, Jake had spent countless hours in remedial training with this ancient bucket of bolts. Every rattling panel, every temperamental circuit, every quirk of its failing systems was familiar to him. The ship's computer wheezed to life as Jake powered up the engines. Warning lights flashed across the control panel like a holiday display. Low fuel pressure, unstable navigation systems, life support operating at 60% efficiency. Any sensible pilot would ground the ship for major repairs. Jake wasn't feeling sensible. He programmed coordinates for Harmony Colony into the navigation system, then deleted them and entered them again manually. Computer records would show his destination, but he could buy himself a few extra minutes before pursuit ships caught up. The shuttle bay doors opened with a grinding mechanical sound that echoed through the station. Jake guided the Underdog out into space, its engines coughing like an old man climbing stairs. Behind him, Nexus Prime glowed with the lights of a military base preparing for war. 30 minutes later, alarms began screaming throughout the academy. Commander Rixtol's voice boomed over communication channels, declaring Jake Morrison a deserter who had stolen military property. 3 pursuit ships launched immediately, their sleek forms cutting through space like silver arrows. But Jake had a head start in something the pursuit ships lacked: complete desperation. He pushed the Underdog's engines past their safety limits, coaxing extra speed from systems that probably should have exploded. The ship groaned and shuddered, but it held together through sheer stubbornness. The first real test came at the edge of hegemony space. Long-range sensors detected the Devourer patrol network, a web of enemy ships monitoring every approach to the occupied colonies. Jake studied their movement patterns on his flickering display screen. The Devourers moved with mechanical precision, following predetermined routes that covered every possible attack vector. Their ships were massive and powerful, designed to crush any conventional assault. But as Jake watched their patrols, he noticed something interesting. They ignored anything too small or too damaged to be a military threat. Debris fields, disabled cargo ships, random space junk. The Devourers paid no attention to objects that couldn't fight back. Their scanning systems were programmed to detect threats, not harmless wreckage. Jake smiled for the first time in days. The Underdog looked like harmless wreckage even on its best day. He shut down all non-essential systems, letting the shuttle drift on momentum alone. Its energy signature dropped to almost nothing. On Devourer sensors, it would appear to be just another piece of battlefield debris floating through space. The plan worked better than Jake had dared hope. Devourer patrol ships passed within a few thousand kilometers without giving the Underdog a second glance. Their advanced sensors, designed to detect sophisticated military technology, completely missed an ancient training shuttle running on backup power. But the real challenges were just beginning. As Jake approached Harmony's star system, his ship's systems began failing one by one. The hyperdrive overloaded and shut down, leaving him on conventional engines for the final approach. Life support started cycling between too hot and too cold, making the cabin feel like a sauna 1 minute and a freezer the next. Jake had to get creative to keep flying. When navigation failed, he used his knowledge of stellar cartography from basic training to plot course corrections by the stars themselves. When the environmental controls died completely, he rigged a temporary fix using parts from the food processor and the shower unit. The Harmony system looked like a graveyard when Jake finally arrived. Devourer harvesting ships moved across the colony world's surface like giant metal insects, their machines stripping away every trace of organic life. The planet's once green continents now showed brown and gray, as if all color had been drained from the world. Jake kept the underdog's power signature as low as possible while he scanned for the mining complex where survivors were hiding. His equipment was too old and weak to penetrate very deep underground, but he eventually detected faint energy readings from the coordinates Pete Sullivan had transmitted. Landing was another adventure entirely. The underdog's attitude control system hiccuped on final approach, nearly sending the shuttle into an uncontrolled spin. Jake fought with manual controls that felt like they were made of rubber, finally bringing the ship down in a bone-jarring crash landing that would have destroyed a more delicate vessel. He sat in the pilot's seat for a moment, amazed that he was still alive. Through the cracked viewport, he could see devourer machines moving in the distance, their lights sweeping across the dead landscape like the eyes of metal predators hunting for prey. Jake gathered his emergency supplies and headed for the mining complex entrance. The heavy metal doors were sealed tight, designed to keep out radiation and toxic gases from the planet's industrial operations. He pounded on the door with a wrench from his toolkit, hoping someone inside would hear. After several tense minutes, the door cracked open. A bearded man in mining coveralls peered out suspiciously, then his eyes widened with shock and hope. "Pete Sullivan," the man said, offering his hand. "Colony Administrator. Are you here to rescue us?" Jake looked at the man's tired face, then at the frightened families visible behind him in the tunnel. Children clutched toys and parents held each other close. 300 people who had been written off as dead by the galaxy's military leaders. "I'm Jake Morrison," he said, shaking Pete's hand firmly. "And yes, I'm here to get you out." He didn't mention that he was just a failed cadet with no real plan and a shuttle that might not even restart. Sometimes, Jake thought, hope was more important than truth. The real work was about to begin. Jake followed Pete Sullivan through the dark tunnels of the mining complex, his flashlight beam cutting through air thick with dust and fear. The underground shelter stretched for kilometers in all directions, a maze of work areas and living spaces that had become home to 300 desperate people. Children sat quietly in makeshift bedrooms carved from storage alcoves. Their parents spoke in whispers, trying not to let terror show in their voices. Everyone knew the devourer machines were getting closer. The sound of grinding metal echoed through the rock above them as the harvesting equipment systematically stripped the planet bare. "We have maybe 12 hours before they break through," Pete explained as they walked. "The machines are designed for efficiency, not precision. They'll eventually realize we're down here and start digging." Jake studied the tunnel layout on Pete's tablet. The mining complex was huge, but it only had 3 main entrances. If the devourers focused their machines on those access points, they could break through the heavy doors in hours. "What about the ventilation shafts?" Jake asked. 2, small for adults," said Grace Kim, the colony's medical officer. She had joined them after treating a child with breathing problems caused by the recycled air. "Maybe children could fit, but we'd never get everyone out that way." Jake nodded, his mind working through possibilities. 300 people, including 47 children. The underdog could carry maybe 20 passengers if they removed all the equipment and packed people like cargo. Even if his shuttle could make multiple trips, which was doubtful given its condition, there wasn't enough time. "Tell me about the industrial equipment," Jake said. "What kind of machinery do you have down here?" Pete led him to the main work area where massive mining machines sat silent and dark. Excavation drills, explosive charges, heavy transport vehicles designed to move tons of raw material. All of it useless for fighting devourer harvesters, but Jake wasn't thinking about fighting. "The devourers are machines," he said, running his hand along a drilling unit. "They follow programs, they're efficient, but they're not creative." Grace looked confused. "What do you mean?" Jake pulled up the colony's geological surveys on Pete's tablet. The mining complex sat on top of a network of natural caves that stretched for dozens of kilometers underground. The miners had been careful to avoid those areas, but the caves were there, hidden beneath layers of rock and metal. "We don't fight them," Jake explained. "We make them think we're somewhere else." His plan was simple in concept but dangerous in execution. They would use the mining charges to create a controlled collapse in the main tunnels, sealing the colonists off from the Devourer machines. But at the same time, they would blast new openings into the natural cave system, creating escape routes, too irregular for the mechanical harvesters to follow. The machines will detect the explosions and assume we're trapped in the main complex, Jake said. They'll focus their efforts on digging through the collapsed tunnels while we evacuate through the caves. Pete studied the geological data with growing excitement. There's a cave system that connects to the old mining site 15 kilometers south. If we can reach it, we can surface near your shuttle. But what about the Devourer ships? Grace asked. They'll detect us the moment we reach the surface. Jake smiled grimly. Not if they're busy dealing with a bigger problem. The next few hours were the most intense of Jake's life. Working with Pete and a team of experienced miners, he helped set explosive charges throughout the complex. They had to be precise. Too much force would bring the entire structure down on top of them. Too little wouldn't create the diversion they needed. Jake found himself drawing on knowledge he hadn't realized he possessed. Basic engineering from his academy classes, survival training he'd barely passed, even childhood memories of exploring caves in Ohio with his father. Everything came together in a way that surprised him. You know what you're doing, Pete observed as Jake calculated blast patterns on his tablet. I'm making it up as I go, Jake admitted. But sometimes that's better than following a plan that doesn't work. While they prepared the explosives, other colonists worked to organize the evacuation. Grace Kim divided the group into teams, putting the strongest adults in charge of helping children and elderly residents through the cave system. Families gathered their most precious possessions knowing they might never see their homes again. Jake checked his chronometer. 8 hours until the Devourer machines broke through the sealed doors. 8 hours to save 300 lives with a plan that had never been tested and equipment that might not work. The explosions began at exactly 1800 hours. Jake triggered the charges in sequence, bringing down sections of tunnel in carefully planned collapses. The sound was deafening, even through the rock walls. Dust filled the air and emergency lights flickered as the mining complex shuddered under the controlled destruction. Above ground, the Devourer harvesters detected the seismic activity immediately. Their sensors registered the collapse patterns and calculated that the remaining humans were now trapped in the deepest parts of the complex. The machines redirected their efforts, focusing massive drilling equipment on the areas where they believed survivors were hiding. But Jake and the colonists were already moving through the natural caves, following routes that Pete's geological surveys had mapped decades earlier. The passages were narrow and difficult, forcing them to crawl through sections barely wide enough for a human body. But they were paths the Devourers couldn't predict or follow. Jake helped carry children through the tightest passages, his small size finally becoming an advantage instead of a weakness. Where larger, stronger beings might have struggled, he could slip through openings that would stop a Krillian warrior or challenge a Zephyrian scout. Stay quiet, he whispered to a frightened girl who couldn't be more than 6 years old. We're playing hide-and-seek with the monsters and we're winning. The cave system was exactly as Pete's surveys had predicted. After 3 hours of careful movement, they reached the abandoned mining site where Jake's shuttle waited. The underdog looked even more battered than before, but its engines still responded when Jake activated the startup sequence. The real test came when they began loading passengers. The shuttle wasn't designed for civilian evacuation, and Jake had to be creative about using every available space. He removed seats, equipment, even panels from the walls to make room for more people. Will it fly? Pete asked as they packed the last group of children into the cargo hold. Jake looked at the overcrowded shuttle, its systems already straining under the extra weight. Warning lights flashed across the control panel, and the engines made sounds that definitely weren't in the technical manual. It has to, he said, settling into the pilot's seat. Everyone hold on. The underdog lifted off with all the grace of a falling brick, but it flew. Jake nursed the engines carefully, coaxing every bit of performance from systems that were never meant to handle this kind of load. The shuttle climbed slowly away from Harmony's surface, its hull groaning with stress. Behind them, Devourer machines continued their futile search of the collapsed mining complex, unaware that their prey had already escaped through paths their programming couldn't imagine. Jake set course for the nearest hegemony outpost, pushing his luck and his ship to their absolute limits. In the cargo hold, 300 colonists huddled together, alive against all odds because one failed cadet had refused to accept that rescue was impossible. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the weakest person in the room was exactly who you needed when everything else had failed. The underdog limped into hegemony space 12 hours later, its engines coughing and its hull held together by nothing more than determination. Jake had pushed the ancient shuttle far beyond its limits, but somehow it had carried 300 lives to safety. Emergency medical ships rushed to meet them as soon as they crossed the border. Jake collapsed in his pilot seat as rescue teams began evacuating the colonists. He had been awake for 36 hours straight, running on adrenaline and stubborn refusal to give up. When Commander Rixtal's security forces boarded the shuttle to arrest him for desertion, Jake was too exhausted to care. But something had changed in the way people looked at him. The medical teams treating Harmony's survivors spoke his name with respect. News of the impossible rescue spread through military channels faster than official reports could be filed. Jake Morrison, the Academy's biggest failure, had achieved what the galaxy's best tactical minds declared impossible. The court-martial proceedings lasted exactly 15 minutes. Admiral Kate Brooks of the Earth Defense Fleet attended personally, along with representatives from 6 different alien species. They had come not to punish Jake, but to understand how he had succeeded where their advanced strategies had failed. "Cadet Morrison," Admiral Brooks said, her voice carrying the authority of 40 years in space. "Your actions violated direct orders and military protocol. However, the results speak for themselves. 300 civilians are alive because you refused to accept the impossible." Commander Rixtal stood stiffly beside the Admiral's table. The hegemony officer had spent sleepless nights analyzing Jake's rescue mission, trying to understand how such a simple plan had worked so perfectly. His forearms moved restlessly as he spoke. The tactical situation made no sense, he admitted. Devourer patrols should have detected any approach. Their harvesting machines should have found the colonists within hours. Every military analysis predicted complete failure. Dr. Ryan Webb stepped forward, carrying a datapad filled with technical readouts. The xenobiologist had been studying captured Devourer technology since Jake's return, and his findings were changing everything the galaxy thought it knew about their enemy. "The Devourers are artificial intelligence created by an extinct organic species," Dr. Webb explained. "Their programming contains detailed behavioral profiles for every known galactic race. They can predict and counter Krillian battle fury, Zephyrian speed tactics, and Mentari telepathic coordination." He activated a holographic display showing complex behavioral algorithms. Jake stared at the swirling patterns of data, most of which made no sense to him. "But they have no profile for humans," Dr. Webb continued. "Humanity joined the galactic community too recently. The Devourers' creators never encountered our species, so their tactical algorithms have a blind spot." Jake felt a strange mixture of pride and confusion. "You mean they couldn't predict what I would do because I'm human?" "More than that," said Dr. Amy Clark, the Academy's leading expert on alien psychology. "Human behavior patterns fall outside their programming parameters. Your willingness to attempt seemingly impossible tasks, your ability to improvise solutions from available resources, your refusal to accept logical conclusions, these traits don't exist in their behavioral models." The implications were staggering. For months, the hegemony had been losing battles against an enemy that could predict their every move. Devourer fleets had countered every conventional strategy because their programming accounted for how rational military minds would respond to tactical situations. But Jake Morrison wasn't a rational military mind. He was a failed cadet who didn't know enough to understand why his plans shouldn't work. Admiral Brooks studied Jake with calculating eyes. "Cadet Morrison, how would you fight a war against an enemy that can predict conventional tactics?" Jake thought carefully before answering. The question felt like another test, but this time the stakes were higher than his academy ranking. "Use unconventional tactics," he said finally. "Do things that don't make sense to their computers. Keep changing strategies so they can't adapt. Use each species' abilities in ways they wouldn't expect." "Explain." Jake stood straighter, feeling more confident than he had since arriving at the academy. Krillians are strong, but everyone uses them as frontline fighters. What if they handled delicate equipment repairs instead? Zephyrians are fast, so they're always used for hit-and-run attacks. What if they planted slow-acting sabotage devices? Mentari are telepathic, so they coordinate battle plans. What if they deliberately created mental static to jam enemy sensors? The room fell silent as alien officers processed his suggestions. These ideas violated 10,000 years of military doctrine. They went against everything the hegemony had learned about using each species' natural advantages. They were also completely unpredictable. Commander Rixtal's stone-like expression actually showed surprise. You would deliberately use our weaknesses instead of our strengths? I'd use strengths in weak ways and weaknesses in strong ways, Jake corrected. The enemy expects logical deployment of assets. If we're illogical, they can't counter us. 3 weeks later, Jake stood on the bridge of the battleship Defiance as it approached the Titan's gate system. The Devourers had massed their largest fleet there, preparing to harvest the sector's most populated worlds. Every conventional analysis said the coming battle would be a massacre. Jake wasn't using conventional analysis. His task force looked chaotic to outside observers. Krillian berserker ships flew in careful formations usually reserved for diplomatic escorts. Zephyrian scouts moved at deliberate speeds that wasted their natural advantages. Mentari telepaths coordinated with human strategists whose thoughts were too scattered for enemy algorithms to process. All ships begin Operation Wildcard, Jake announced over the communication channel. The battle that followed broke every rule of space combat. Ships scattered when they should have concentrated fire. Support vessels attacked heavy cruisers while battleships provided cover for medical frigates. Formations dissolved and reformed in patterns that made no tactical sense. But there was method in the madness. Jake had studied every previous Devourer engagement, identifying micro-patterns in their response algorithms. By constantly shifting tactics and using each species' capabilities in unexpected ways, he kept enemy systems in constant recalibration mode. The Devourers couldn't achieve optimal efficiency when they couldn't predict what would happen next. The tide turned when Jake realized the enemy command ship was trying to withdraw. Not from damage, but to process new tactical data. He led a desperate assault in a captured Devourer shuttle, using the same infiltration techniques that had saved Harmony Colony. The virus that human programmer Danny Torres had created didn't destroy Devourer systems. Instead, it fed them false data about human psychology, making their predictions even more wildly inaccurate. Across the sector, Devourer fleets began making critical errors as their tactical algorithms tried to counter behaviors that didn't actually exist. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood before the Galactic Council wearing the insignia of Fleet Admiral. The former weakest cadet now commanded the most effective military force in known space, not through superior strength or technology, but through the uniquely human ability to find opportunity in chaos. The Academy had restructured its entire curriculum around what they now called human factors, the unpredictable elements that made impossible victories achievable. Jake's former classmates served as his staff officers, applying lessons learned from a human who had never learned that some things couldn't be done. Alex Carter managed logistics for fleets that operated without supply lines. Maria Santos led special operations teams that accomplished missions by ignoring established protocols. Even Lisa Park commanded her own task force, using communication techniques that confused enemy interception efforts. Commander Rixtal, now Jake's second in command, had become the galaxy's leading expert on unconventional warfare. The hegemony officer who once dismissed human weakness now taught courses on the strategic value of unpredictability. The galaxy spent 10,000 years perfecting military science, he told new cadets during orientation. We learned to use our strengths efficiently and minimize our weaknesses logically. We became predictable. Admiral Morrison taught us that sometimes the greatest strength is not knowing your limitations. Jake smiled as he watched the newest class of cadets begin their training. Among the eager faces, he spotted a struggling Terran student who reminded him of himself just 2 years earlier. The young man looked lost and overwhelmed, clearly the weakest member of his class. Jake made a mental note to offer encouragement. After all, the galaxy's next great leader might be hiding among those the system considered too weak to matter. Sometimes the person everyone underestimated was exactly the person everyone needed.